Okay. Welcome, Bruchim Abayim, Shavua Tov, everyone. It's good to see everybody here for the start of a series that I did not choose the name, Living La Vida Shalom. I don't know who was responsible for that one.
I think it was a
combo.
Really? I probably just agreed to it because I don't know. I don't want to, certain things the rabbi just stays out of. But first of all, we'll say this. Thank you to our hosts, Isaac and Shani. We have to be mechabed kvod achsanya, opening up your home, a relatively new home, and with bliyanara, delicious food, amazing friends and members of our synagogue and beyond, and for a very, very important class. Hashem should bless both of you with arichut yamim, banim zecharim, oshe v'chavod, and all the brachot. And maybe we zocher to see Yeshuot in all of Klal Yisrael through the Torah that we learn. I'll say this: what we're going to talk about tonight and beyond is not typical stuff. This is I will, for those watching, if you have children next to you, this is not a place for them to hang around you. Because these topics are very personal, very sensitive, but they are still very much a part of our Torah as Jewish people. And when I looked at the list of topics that were on that flyer, that beautiful flyer that was made, the one that stuck out to me and probably the most attractive was the topic of intimacy. And there is so much to say about intimacy that I even texted the organizers, Isaac and Jacob, that I probably need a lot more classes than one to talk about this. In fact, you might even stop me in the middle and say, okay, Rabbi, I think we've had enough, and then I'll need even more than 2 or 3. Because intimacy is really the foundation of a marriage. And we're going to see some sources. We're going to talk a lot about it today. We're going to get into some details. We're not going to get into too many halachot. Maybe we'll look at the halachot in the next class about intimacy and the sacredness and the mindset of that. But as an introduction, we'll look at the mitzvah of ona, which will take up most of today's shiur. I will also say, before we get into it, that everything I'm saying today is not my own. I may share some of my feelings, but for the most part, I'm deducing this stuff from a sefer that I consider very worthwhile owning, the Sefer Pnimiyei Halacha, which I give a lot of my halacha classes from, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, who took upon himself to write a sefer on Jewish life, marriage, shalom bayit, and he writes in his introduction that although he felt that maybe he was going outside the lines for doing something like this, because it's not typical for a Rav to write a book like this, but he felt it was his duty and obligation to do so, and it has been accepted by many people and read by thousands around the world. So that's where I'm getting this information from. Maybe it's best that I'll give the class, and then we'll save questions for the end, and if there are questions, just for the sake of the people that are listening online, and so that they don't have to listen to me too long at one point. Okay, sounds okay. All good. Okay, so let's start. Let's break the ice. The mitzvah of marital sexual relations is the mitzvah of ona. We'll look at the overview, some sources of where this comes from. Chachamim tell us that a person is not completely joyous in life and feeling happiness unless he is married. A man is not complete without his wife. A wife is not complete without her husband. And the essence of that union, of that partnership, is expressed through ona, which we translate as marital sexual relations, and we'll speak about that term ona later on tonight. And that is how they become unified, not just through body, not through physically, but rather even spiritually. And the mitzvah needs to be fulfilled with passion, and it needs to be fulfilled with ecstasy. And the husband needs to do what he can to bring as much joy to his wife and pleasure as possible. And the wife has to bring her husband as much joy and pleasure as possible. And that's why the mitzvah is not just called onah, but it's called simchat onah, the joy of sexual relations. That's how it's termed by the Chachamim. And in fact, which we're going to see later, that there is no greater joy in this world, based on the statement of our rabbis, than simchat onah, because it is a foretaste of what you will experience in olam haba. The pleasure and that a person will experience in the next world, the closest thing in this world is marital relations. So not only that, and we're going to talk again more about this later, is that through this idea and this mitzvah, a person also fulfills a different mitzvah, the mitzvah of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you shall love your fellow as yourself in the most complete way, which Rabbi Akiva says, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a fundamental principle in the Torah, because it's only through spouses that we see that love is expressed in all aspects of life, like I said, spiritual and physical. When a married couple lives together, beyachad, each one loving the other no less than themselves, then they fulfill the entire Torah in a very concentrated form. More than that, when a person is performing the mitzvah, or a couple is performing the mitzvah of simchat onah, sexual relations, Chachamim tell us it brings the Shekhinah down. The Shekhinah, God's presence, dwells with the couple. As the Rabbi Akiva says in the Gemara, that if a husband and wife are worthy, then the Shekhinah is with them. But if they are not worthy, then fire consumes them. You may have heard this Divrei Torah before, that the word in Hebrew for husband is ish, aleph, yud, shin, and the word for a woman, for wife, is isha, aleph, shin, hey. And the only difference between the two words is that ish has a yud and isha has a hey, and together they form the name of God. Yud hey is one of the names of Hashem. So if they're working together, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found in the marriage, and the Shekhinah is there. But God forbid, you're not doing the right things. If you're not worthy, the Yud and the Hey, Hashem is removed, and all you're left is with Esh, Aleph, Shin. And fire consumes them, God forbid. More than that, again, this sacred mitzvah that the couple performs can fulfill the mitzvah Peru Urvu, the mitzvah of procreation, which makes them also Hashem's partners in the new creation of life. The Gemara Masechet Nida says that there are three partners in the creation of a person: God, a mother, and a father. Okay, those are the three partners in creation. So those are the more positive ways of looking at marriage and sexual union. There are some negative ways of looking at a sexual union when the marriage flounders, God forbid. Okay, the husband, because of the whatever reason, the Torah talks about one situation where the husband suspects the wife of infidelity, and the Torah tells us that the sotah procedure must go into effect, which includes writing God's name, again specifically God's name, onto a parchment, placing it into a bowl of water, and that water, erasing the name, that water is administered to the wife. Under normal circumstances, you would never be allowed to erase God's name. God, chas v'shalom, erasing God. How careful we are of any book of Sidur on the floor, we lift it up. And here we are actually taking Hashem's name and we are erasing it, but we're doing it in order to repair and bring peace to the marriage. Obviously, if she was guilty and she had denied the fact, she would die from drinking that water. But if she was innocent, that brings not only peace to the marriage, but also is a bracha for her to procreate and have children. The Gemara also says that any man without a wife is not considered a man. That's what the Gemara tells us in Masechet Yevamot. Any man without a wife lives without joy, without blessing, without goodness, without Torah, and without strength and without peace. And a woman that does not have a husband also lacks all of these things as well. And since the foundation of the relationship between a husband and a wife is so important, so Hashem gave us the drive associated, a sexual drive, which is an extremely powerful drive. So Hashem gave us the freedom of choice. When a person directs that drive, that sexual drive, positively towards the mitzvah of onah, then there's nothing greater than that. But God forbid, when that drive is channeled negatively, there's nothing worse as well. As you can see in areas around the world where people use that sexual drive for negativity, you can call it college campuses, you could call it clubs downtown, you could call it brothels and hostels and everywhere around. That's what you see. It's a very powerful drive, and we have to be wary of it. But we'll talk about that probably in another class or two. The importance of the mitzvah. Now that I've given you the sources, the importance of the mitzvah. The mitzvah of onah is for the husband to couple with his wife in an atmosphere of love, in an atmosphere of feeling, of ecstasy, like we said, and to pleasure his wife the best way that he can, until she climaxes in orgasm. That's what we call it. And he remains coupled with her until he finishes, until he ejaculates inside of her. This is the meaning of a pasuk. There's a pasuk. Pasuk in the Torah says, She'era kesuta ve'onata lo yigra, which means that he shall not withhold, literally means he shall not withhold her food, her clothing, and her conjugal rights. This is the obligation of a husband to provide for his wife. Now, since every person's capacity is limited, so the frequency of the mitzvah is also determined by the physical capacity and responsibilities of the person, of the man, of the husband. And therefore, people that are in good health, this is not me saying this is the Chachamim telling you, if someone's in good health and he lives very comfortably without having to exert too much in his life, too much effort, then he can fulfill the mitzvah of onah every single day. And then you have ordinary laborers that may be a little bit more tired. So the Chachamim tell us that they should perform the mitzvah twice a week. Then you have people that are forced to leave home a lot, especially in the olden days, who would travel, merchants, and they are obligated to perform once a week. And then those that have to go even further to perform their business, such as those who travel by boat, their minimum responsibility is once a month. And depending where you fall, that's what it is. In addition, if either spouse desires intimacy, then the other spouse needs to be responsive. And again, this is the foundation of a marriage. A man that does not perform this mitzvah because he wants to cause his wife pain and he wants to make her suffer, he's in violation of that Torah command. It is a Torah command, just like we're not allowed to eat pig, just like we have to give a tenth of our money to tzedakah, just like we can't eat chametz on Pesach. You can't withhold from that. Now, if he doesn't perform the act because out of negligence, then but he doesn't intend to hurt his wife, then it's not a biblical prohibition. It becomes a rabbinical prohibition. Still no, but not as bad as not doing it just because you want to tick off your wife and make her upset. We said at the start that the mitzvah of onah, of sexual relations, also fulfills the mitzvah of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha in its perfect form. Because each side, each party looks out for their spouse the best way that they can. And since the greatest pleasure that people can experience in this world is the mitzvah of sexual relations, so if a man deprives his wife of that joy and pleasure, and therefore oppresses her, therefore you are lacking in that. Because there's nobody but him that can bring her that joy. And likewise, a woman who deprives her husband from doing so, no one else can fill that void for him. The halakha says very openly that avoidance of this mitzvah is principal grounds for divorce, for girushin, for get. If a husband declares that his wife repulses him, and if a husband says that he has no interest in sexual relations with her, and does not want according to the duty that he requires, whatever it's once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, and he does not want it, then she's entitled to file for divorce, and she would receive her full ketubah payment. That's what she would receive. Even if the husband is willing to couple with her, but let's say he says, I'll be with my wife intimately, but on condition that we are both clothed, we're not naked. I don't want to be naked. Also, that is grounds for divorce, and she will get her full ketubah. If a wife, the other way around, if a wife does not consent to sexual relations with her husband at the frequency that the halacha says, then he has a right to divorce her without paying her ketubah, and she walks out with nothing. And anyone that refuses to keep what it is are called rebellious, because they're rebelling against this obligation and this duty to themselves and the great mitzvah, a mitzvah onah. What does this word onah mean? I apologize for the hoarseness. I just can't seem to get my voice back. It's been weeks. What is this mitzvah? What is the word onah? Onah spelled Ain Vav Nun He. And the Torah tells us she'era kesuta ve'onata lo igra. The Ramban, who Nachmanides, great Sephardic sage, lived in Spain, ended up moving to Eretz Israel and dying there. He says that the word she'era means flesh to flesh contact during intimacy. Kesuta means the bed and the bedding used by the couple. And onata is the actual conjugal act itself. Each of these three things need to be, applicable in order for the mitzvah to work. Rashi, who most people translate this pasuk as, says, no, kesuta, she'era is her food. A husband is obligated to provide his wife food. Kesuta is covering, such as clothing. A husband is obligated to provide his wife clothing. And onata, like we said, is the conjugal act. So everyone agrees that onata is the act of sexual relations is the essence of the marriage, and it gives the expression of love. The disagreement is whether or not a husband is obligated to give food and clothing to his wife. According to the Ramban, no. According to Rashi, yes. But even according to the Ramban, who says a husband doesn't have to give food and clothing to his wife, they all agree that without these basic necessities, a person cannot fulfill the mitzvah of onah properly. They cannot fulfill the mitzvah of sexual relations, because a true component of one's love for a spouse is very deeply rooted in responsibility that I have to provide for my wife's or spouse best interests and well-being, and that includes food and clothing. So it's inconceivable that anyone that would love his or his spouse or her spouse would not make sure to feed his spouse or clothe his spouse. The word onah has three meanings. First meaning, it can mean a time or a season, and therefore, like we said, we have different intervals dictated by the husband's stamina on what is the proper time that a man has to be with his wife intimately. That's one way of looking at the word onah. Another way of looking at the word onah is torment, suffering, and the opposite would be responsiveness and he'anut, which is to reciprocate an act. When a man separates from his wife, he torments her. Lavan told Yaakov in the parasha, we're going to read it in a few weeks, he says, Im te'aned benotai, if you torment my daughters, you should know that God's watching you and you're going to be punished. This is the lashon that he used. If you separate from them, if you don't provide them with onah, I mean, you have an obligation, Yaakov, to be physical and intimate with my daughters, Rachel and Leah. This is also why on Yom Kippur we are commanded lehit anot, to afflict ourselves. And on Yom Kippur, one of the things we're not allowed to do is to have sexual relations with our spouse. We have to act as if we are in nida. Similarly, if God forbid a woman is raped, the word in Hebrew is called einui. The Shechem, the son of Hamor, who raped the daughter of Yaakov, Dinah, the Torah tells us that by Aneha, he took her and he raped her. In contrast to Inui, which is tormenting, Ona is to couple with joy and pleasure. So therefore, Ona is the opposite, is responsiveness and the prevention of tormenting the other party. Both of these interpretations have halachic significance. Number one, we said a husband is obligated to be with his wife at fixed intervals, and depending on his job and his stamina. And second, the sexual union needs to be joy-filled. It needs to be filled with responsiveness that expresses that love. And the third explanation of the word ona is that it's lashon ma'on, which is lashon of home. That ona is a dwelling. That the husband must provide his wife with a place to live, and it's going to be in that place where he lives where he's going to fulfill his duty. The rabbis like to use lashon naki, clean language, in reference to things that are labeled nowadays as rated R or rated X. And the Chachamim refer to this mitzvah as derech eretz, believe it or not. When I tell you the words derech eretz, you're probably thinking just being a good Jew, right? Have derech eretz, be kind, smile, be respectful, be giving, derech eretz. All the other wonderful midot come with derech eretz. Derech eretz literally means the way of the world. Why is it called derech eretz? Because it is natural for every man to love his wife. Every man naturally should have a desire to love his wife and make love to his wife and bring her as much joy and pleasure as he can. And likewise, the other way around as well, that every woman should naturally love her husband, yearn for him, to make her love him, and to make love to him as well, and bring him joy. And Hashem created human beings with this nature, to want this by nature. And a person who doesn't feel this, a person who doesn't feel this yearning physically or psychologically, is unhealthy. He's unhealthy physically and he's unhealthy psychologically. So the goal of the mitzvah is to channel and sanctify that nature, how we were created, and not to negate those feelings. Now, another mitzvah that is connected to the mitzvah of Ona is the mitzvah of procreation. We spoke about this at the start of the class. How are we doing on time? 22 minutes. Okay, not bad. And you can only fulfill the mitzvah of Peru Urvu through the mitzvah of Ona. Yes, if a person is not able to have a child, we're going to get to that. They can go and adopt a child, but you wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah of Peru Urvu. So other mitzvahs you'd be fulfilling, but Peru Urvu has to be done through the mitzvah of sexual relations. So it also demonstrates the greatness of this mitzvah, because now, like we said, you are partnering with Hashem in the creating of a new human being. But, and a big but, the mitzvah of Ona, of sexual relations, is not dependent upon the mitzvah of having a child. Because the mitzvah of having sexual relations also applies even when there is no chance that that sexual union will lead to pregnancy, such as where the woman is pregnant, or nursing, or has reached menopause, or is infertile. In all those situations where it's not possible to create a child, you still have a mitzvah of Ona. The Chachamim tell us that the greater the joy during the act of Ona, the finer the character of the future children. If a couple's sexual union lacks devotion of love, then you will, God forbid, have imperfections that manifest in the children that are born. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I forgot to put my bookmark, so I apologize while I look for it. A couple of weeks ago, we read the opening parasha of Parashat Bereshit. And there we listed the 10 generations between Adam and Noach. Now, I have to find it. But in this parasha, I obviously I can't find it. When you need to find it, you can't find it, right? Of course. I brought the wrong book. I believe it was Lemech, but I'll no, okay. So I gotta look for it. Anyways, there's the Kli Yakar in one of the psukim talks about how Lemech had two wives, Ada and Sila, and the Torah goes out of its way to talk about that he had two wives. Why do we care? We have two wives. Why even tell me that information? Just tell me. Just give me the lineage. How are we gonna get? How are we gonna get to Noach? That's our 10 generations. You don't think that he has two wives. So Kli Yakar explains that this man had two wives. One of them was a wife simply to fulfill the mitzvah of to have sexual relations just out of the physical pleasure, but not for any purpose. And the other one was to fill it for a purpose. And it turns out that from one wife, the children that came from that wife led to Noach, and then Shem, and then Abraham, and so on and so forth. And the other one, the children that came there ended up building the Tower of Babel, and we're all evil. Because when you are directing and you're channeling it for the purpose of holiness, then good things come out of it, and your children are proper. So when a husband and wife perform the conjugal act of intercourse, and they're at peace with each other, and they have intent to produce worthy offspring, then Hashem is going to grant their wish and give them worthy children. Not only that, but let's get a little Kabbalistic here, because everyone loves Kabbalah. But our rabbis tell us that every marital sexual act that is undertaken and performed infuses the world with more life and more blessing. Even if the wife does not conceive, from that union, never to think that the husband is wasting seed, but rather there is a holy neshama that is coming into existence. And this is why, very apropos, because it's mamash this week's parasha and last week's parasha, Lech Lecha Vayera, that this is why Abraham was allowed to sleep with Sarah and be with Sarah, even though she was barren. Because technically, if she couldn't have a child, then how's he allowed to be with her? Isn't it called wasting seed? No, God forbid. It was not a waste. And the Zohar explains that every single time Abraham and Sarah lived together intimately for 100 years, or whatever, they didn't get married when they were born, but whatever age they got married, up to the age of 100, that they had many, many times intimate sexual relations, the Zohar says that led to the creation of souls in the supernal realms, in Shamayim, which then descended to this world, where various families were eventually created. And that's the meaning in last week's parasha, Ve'eta nefesh asher asu becharan, the soul that they made in Haran. What soul? They hadn't soul. They had nobody with. They had no children. Rashi says, they brought people together. They were Mekarev people, Baal Tshuva, and that's who they brought with them. Says the Zohar, that's not what that pasuk means. The soul that they brought from Haran. The soul they brought from Haran is the souls they created in Shamayim that were waiting to come down in the future as the future of the Jewish people. So never, don't God forbid, think that Abraham and Sarah were just wasting opportunities. So even, what do we see from here? Even if a couple has not been blessed with children, when they lovingly and devotingly have sexual relations, they become partners in bringing souls to the world. Now, to understand this is very deep to understand this, but there's obviously a lot of things going on in Shamayim in various aspects and phases. But that means that several, if not hundreds of couples have some sort of part in a creation of a human being, at least a neshama of the human being. So even if a couple have finished having children, that's it, they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever it is, and they still have sexual relations, then they're still adding life and they're adding blessing to the olam. The halacha, in fact, says that if a widower who has children, and it's going to be difficult for him to marry a woman who is still fertile still has a mitzvah to marry a woman, even though she will not bear children. Because being married is the most wholesome human state that a person could be in. So it's just all very interesting ideas brought down in the Zohar. The Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim in Baghdad, he says this is the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim. Asher pirio yiten be'ito ve'alehu lo yibol. The fruit which yields in season, ve'alehu lo yibol. But the leaves will never fade. Meaning, even if a man has sexual relations with his wife while she's pregnant, this is what he writes, or she's nursing, that seed never fades. It doesn't go away. It's not considered whatever sexual activity that is. After menopause, it will create neshamot. It will create souls. In fact, the Gemara Masechet Nida says that sexual intercourse during the last trimester of a person's pregnancy, is beneficial. These are the words: beneficial both for the woman and for the fetus. It's also, as the doctor says, a trick to speed up labor. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, and the fetus emerges. The Gemara also says the fetus emerges healthy and energetic. These are the words of the Chachamim in Masechet Nida. Now, to fully understand the sanctity of this mitzvah, we have to explain that Hashem wanted to benefit humanity. And Hashem created the world incomplete to provide people with opportunities to perfect His world and make it better. We call this tikkun olam. The greatest shortcoming that in all of creation is detachment. Hashem removed Himself from this world a little bit, and every time He moves Himself from this world, we see evil, because He concealed His light. And therefore, all creatures, even us, all of us, even the good ones, even the tzaddikim, are detached from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And everyone looks out for himself. And that leads to strife sometimes, it leads to discord, it leads to arguments, war, in really, really extreme cases. That's why this world is called the world of detachment and the world of deception. And the fundamental principle of Jewish emunah is to believe in Hashem's unity, that He runs the world, and there is no other God except for Him. By the way, this is also the mitzvah. He brings down Rabbi Melamed. Why there's a mitzvah to settle in Eretz Yisrael? Because Eretz Yisrael is the link between heaven and earth. That is the holiness and the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. It allows a detachment to come and bring itself closer. Kibbutz Galuyot, everyone will come to Eretz Yisrael at the time of Mashiach. That is where it's going to be revealed that Hashem is Melech Machia Melachim, over the heavens and over the earth. So the value of this is extremely important, because now we can understand the importance of this mitzvah of onah between husband and wife, because it's a perfect fulfillment of that mitzvah of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow as yourself, because that's the greatest possible unity, the union between two different individuals. I was my own self. Why do I need to get married? A lot of people ask that question. Why do I need to get married? I'm rich. I have a lot of cars. I don't need responsibility. I don't need to take care of somebody else. I have my own pal. Whatever it is, I don't want the headache. Because in a world of detachment, that's what you feel. In a world of detachment, I just want to be detached. I don't want to be connected to anyone. Hashem doesn't want that. He wants you to attach. He wants you to attach to Him. And the best way to attach to Him is by attaching yourself to a wife, to a woman, and a wife attaching yourself to a man. It's the best, greatest possible unity of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is when a husband and wife come together, because then the body and the soul come together. The soul wants good, the body is drawn to evil. They are negative, they are opposites. How do we get them together? Very simple. I do the mitzvah of onah. The mitzvah of onah, the mitzvah of sexual relations is what? I'm bringing the body and soul together because I'm transforming even the evil inclination to good. How? Because through that mitzvah, I achieve unity amongst ourselves and unity with Hashem. So it is a huge mitzvah in that aspect, that it combines the greatest joy and as well the unity of Hashem. It is also mitzvah of onah, the mitzvah of sexual relations, serves as a metaphor for the union between Hashem and the Jewish people. Pasuk says, Umsos chatan al kala yasis alayich Elohayich. We say this in the Chadodi, but it really comes from a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Just like a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so too will Hashem rejoice over you. And the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Akiva says, no day was as precious as when the Jews were given the book of Shir HaShirim. What is the book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs? You read Shir HaShirim, you would think it's a rated X novel. Shir HaShirim, right? That's what it talks about, is love and breasts and all these physical. Nothing is physical in that book. Everything is really the Hashem being the groom and Kalat being the bride, being the Jewish people, and the connection. But Shlomo HaMelech had to write it into terms that we can understand. So Rabbi Akiva says that of all the writings, everything is holy, Kodesh. But Shir HaShirim is Kodesh Kodashim. Shir HaShirim is a holy of holies. So the love between husband and wife is so sublime that it is compared to this love that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the relationship between God and his people. The Gemara tells us that the cheruvim, the cherubs that were on top of the Aron in the Bet HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, were in the shape of a man and a woman fulfilling the mitzvah of Ona. That's what that's what you would see. And the Chachamim tell us that when the Jews would go to the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim for the festivals, for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, you know what the Kohanim would do from a distance, obviously, because you couldn't go into Kodesh HaKodashim? They would roll back the curtains so that everybody could see the cheruvim intertwined. And when they saw the cheruvim like this, they realized and they said, Hashem loves us. We see that there's a connection between us and God, just like the love between a male and the female. But when Gemara also says, but when the Jewish people stopped performing the will of God and they would put the curtain, they would see the cherubim facing the walls in opposite directions. All right, so that's what we see. And we mentioned Yom Kippur before when we were discussing the word of Onah. But since the essence of marriage is sacred, so during the times of the Bet HaMikdash, what was the day, one of 2 days, where people would occupy themselves with matchmaking? Yom Kippur. That's why it's considered one of the happiest days. Why? Because Yom Kippur, everybody would come to the Bet HaMikdash. Now ask yourself, you read that Gemara, a lot of people don't know what it's talking about. Aren't people in Jewel, like Yom Kippur? What are they doing with matchmaking? Okay, first of all, time Bet HaMikdash, there were no synagogues. Prayer was done through either on your own and in isolation, and it was really the korbanot of the day. It was a sacrifice, the avodah of the Kohen Gadol. People would just come to the plaza of the temple to see whether or not they would be forgiven and whether or not the Kohen Gadol would come out alive. Right? That was the whole spectacle of Yom Kippur. There was praying, there was fasting, no question. But what happens when you put thousands of people in one plaza? You meet each other, right? And that's where they met. That's where they met on Yom Kippur. And it's not a coincidence, because what is a wedding? A wedding is a bride and a groom, two individuals that are uniting and starting their life together, and it's a mitzvah to come together. And the Chachamim that tell us that on Yom Kippur is the most opportune time to come close to Hashem. It's when we are closest with God on Yom Kippur. We see the expression of this union when Shlomo HaMelech stabilized Malchut Yisrael, the kingdom of Israel, and he built the Bet HaMikdash. He declared a week-long celebration for all of Israel, which, by the way, went through Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Was one of the only times where Chachamim tells Yom Kippur was not observed. Okay, the week-long celebration, and on the 8th day he let people go, and the pasuk says that the people bade the king goodbye, and they went to their homes joyful, gladdened in their heart, because of all the goodness that Hashem showed to him and David Avdi. So what does it mean they went home? The Gemara explains that all their husbands went home and their wives were pure. None of them were nida. That's miracle number one. Joyful, they had the radiance of the Shekhinah, every person. Glad of heart, every single woman conceived a boy. And over all the goodness, there was a voice that came down from Shamayim that says everybody has their place in Olam Haba. So we see in the times of Beit HaMikdash, Hashem was happy with his people, and it was like a chatan is misameach with Kala, and that spread through all the homes. Even when the Jewish people received the Torah on Har Sinai in Parshat Va'etchanan, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, go back to your tents. Everyone return to your tents. Meaning what? Because for 3 days they had to separate from their wives. They couldn't even be with their wives because everybody had to be in a state of purity. Now that the Torah was given, Moshe says, go back, fulfill the mitzvah. And there also, the Chachamim tell us that all the women conceived on that night. So there is a parallel between Hashem and this mitzvah. There is a parallel between the Torah and this mitzvah. And of course, what is Har Sinai? The giving of the Torah on Har Sinai, the wedding day, right? The lifting up the mountain was like the chuppah, simchat Torah, right? That we just celebrated. There's everything is about a wedding. We read the ketubah on Shavuot, like everything that's connected to these holidays. Chatanim, where does this come from? It comes from this idea of kimsos chatan vekala. This idea runs totally counter to the view of our non-Jewish residents of the world, where in their opinion, all physical pleasures are rooted in material, are rooted in sin, and are totally detached from spiritual matters. And that is why all the pastors and Christians or whatever, or they refrain. They don't get married because to them this is asur, totally asur. I cannot engage in this. But no, the unique role of the Jewish people is exact. I'm taking something that is rooted in physicality and I'm bringing it up to the highest level, as if I'm building a connection with me and Hashem. Bilam Arasham, in his attempt to curse Bnei Israel, all those curses became blessings. What did he say? Mi mana afar Yaakov, mitzvaret rova Yisrael. Meaning, who is the one that counts the dust of Yaakov? The dust cloud, the rova Yisrael. And the Gemara says, what does this mean? That Hashem sits and he counts the matings of the Jewish people. He's there picking and taking drops of seed and the eggs, and he's just putting them all together. And Bilam couldn't understand how this worked because Bilam wasn't a Jew. He didn't have that connection to God, and that's where he lacked. Just a few more minutes. Under normal circumstances, every person has to look out for himself. Because again, imenani li mili. If no one takes out for me and looks out for me, then who's going to look out for me? The problem is that when we only look out for ourselves, we realize our lives lack, and therefore we feel lonely. And loneliness brings us to sorrow and brings us to depression. And or it could bring us to egotism, because I think that I'm more important than anybody else and I don't need to have a partner. And the mitzvah, and the way to combat this is a mitzvah of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And like we said, the best way is through the union of the best manifestation of this mitzvah is through the union of sexual relations, because that's where you see the greatest love and the greatest pleasure. That's why it's called simchat ona. It's the joy of marital sexual relations, because that's when Hashem, the divine, is revealed to everybody. A person can mistakenly think, like we said, that it's all a physical act. Everything is physical, and therefore there's no difference. Like all the animals, you act like animals. It's incorrect. Hashem gave us this drive. Hashem gave man and the woman the ability to form that union, and have Hashem, His name, Yud Hey, together in that union, where Hashem brings them all as one, so that His name is found within them. And like we said, this is also a foretaste of Olam Haba. It's a ray of light, kiviyachol, of you wondering what that's going to feel like. The experience of sexual relations is a little bit of that. In reality, every single mitzvah should feel like this. Every single mitzvah. You read the L'Shem Yichud before you do every mitzvah. That's what we talk about. It brings nachat ruach leyotzro. Hashem gets pleasure from this. That really, every time we shake a lulav, every time we sit in the sukkah, every time we hear the shofar, every time I give tzedakah, every time I stand up for my parent, every time I give maaser, every time I give honor to the Kohanim, every time I learn some Torah, I should feel Olam Haba. I should feel the next world. That's really what we should be feeling. But unfortunately, because of barriers and because of screens and because of things that conceal Hashem's light, we don't feel that. And we depending on your level, depending on how much of that emotion you're going to have. But you should know that in reality, that's what we should be feeling. But there's one mitzvah that we're able to feel that. And that's the mitzvah of Ona. There's only two mitzvot, in fact. I take that back. There's two mitzvot that have the feeling of Olam Haba. Ona, sexual relations, and Shabbat. Mitzvah of Shabbat is called Me'en Olam Haba. It's like Olam Haba. We say that in Birkat Hamazon. Me'en Olam Haba. It's a foretaste of the next world. It allows us to move through this antechamber, move through this hallway to get us, and because you know something good is waiting on the other side. And in contrast, those who sin sexually, those who are promiscuous, those who commit incest, those who commit adultery, who do not observe the laws of Nida and misdirect their passions, misdirect that physicality, instead of creating souls, instead of defeating their ego, instead of connecting to Hashem, they're breaching, they're being poretz, they're breaching with their transgressions the good and the moral framework that Hashem put in this world. And they don't have the privilege to experience what true love is, and they lose their portion in Olam Haba. They don't get their portion because they don't connect to the eternal. They don't connect to something that's long-lasting. They don't connect to true life. They're just inheriting the abyss. The last thing we'll talk about today, end up on a good, all this is good. But one thing that our rabbis tell us is that when our ancestors were slaves in Egypt, the Egyptians wanted to prevent the men from reproducing. And they did this in order to wipe out Am Yisrael. This was the Paro's plan. Just give them backbreaking labor, and they'll never want to come home and be with their wife because they're just too tired. So they weighed them down with the worst type of slavery from dawn to dusk, so that they would come home and feel that the situation would be hopeless. That was a plan. The wives would give up on them, and maybe the wives would go and commit adultery with the Egyptian masters. Right? That was the whole thing. How could a husband look at his wife in the eye after working from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m. Backbreaking work? He was supposed to shelter her. He was supposed to provide for her, love, so on and so forth. And instead, this guy's an Eved. He's a slave, and he's got nothing. So he didn't know what to do, and he was depressed, and he did not want to provide children with his wife, because how am I supposed to provide for my children? If I'm a slave, I make no money. I barely survive myself. So when the wife approached him, Midrash tells us he would back away. He wanted nothing to do physically with his wife, and under such circumstances, most women would feel slighted, and again maybe try to become second wives with somebody else. But that's not what took place. Look what the Chachamim tell us. The Gemara tells us that in the merit of Nashim Tzadkaniot, in the merit of the righteous women, Bnei Israel were redeemed from Egypt. What happened? When the woman went to draw water from the Nile, Hashem arranged that small little fish, not coincidence, small little fish are great for reproduction. Peru urvu is into the fish. Okay, Mazal, Pruvu, Pisces also. That Hashem arranged that small fish would enter the water, did their pitchers, and then they drew up pitchers half full of water and half of little fish. And then they would put 2 pots to boil, one of hot water and one for the fish. And they carried these pots to their husbands who were working in the fields, and they used the hot water to bathe their husbands. They massaged them with oil and gave them food to drink. And they had mitzvah onah. They had relations there in the field, probably not in the open, but they found a private place in the field to have sexual relations. So it was as if each woman told her husband, although you're a contemptible slave in the eyes of the Egyptians, but in my eyes you are important. In my eyes you are precious, and I'm gonna greet you as if you are CEO of Amazon or CEO of this company. And that's how much I care for you. After a hard day's work, I want to massage your body. You're bruised from beatings. I get it, but you are my husband. And you're a husband that I love. And what does the Midrash say? While they ate and they drank, the woman held up mirrors, and they looked at them together with their husbands. And I know this is going to sound really corny, but this is what the Mishnah says. That the Midrash says that she would say, "I am more beautiful than you," and the husband would say, no, I am more beautiful than you, I'm better looking than you. And that stimulated the feelings and the emotions, and they would come together to procreate, all right? And the Hashem made it that everybody had, all of them conceived immediately. That's the meaning in Shir Hashirim, Tachat tapuach or articha, under the apple tree, we awakened you. Hashem brought life right over there. It was all thanks to these mirrors that the woman brought to the field. Once it became pregnant, they went home, and it was time for them to give birth. They went back to the fields. Midrash tells us that they hid the children underneath the ground, and miraculously Hashem was providing them with sustenance so that they would survive, because the Egyptians were looking for any Jewish babies. As tachat tapuach or articha, you woke up from underneath the tree. What happened with these mirrors? So after they left Egypt, they received the Torah, and they were commanded to erect a Mishkan. Every Jew donated gold, copper, silver, expensive fabrics, precious gems for the constructions. The same women that gave birth in the field, they asked themselves, we don't have anything to contribute. We're poor. So what did they say? We have mirrors. We have mirrors. Let's bring the mirrors and contribute it to the Mishkan. And they were the same mirrors that they used to beautify themselves. So even though they treasured these mirrors, they still volunteered to give it to the Mishkan. And the Chachamim tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw this, became very angry. He says, you can't bring mirrors to donate to Mishkan. Mirrors are something bad because it focuses on your physical. You only care about your looks, right? In fact, there's a weird halacha that says men are not allowed to look at mirrors. I spoke about that once a while ago, right? But mirrors only cares about the physical and how you look, and there's nothing spiritual. And Moshe didn't want to accept the donations of the mirrors from these women. And Hashem responded to Moshe, you disdain these mirrors? He goes, these are the mirrors that produce multitudes in Mitzrayim. It was because of these mirrors that we have children, that we have this nation. You have to accept them. Take them, Hashem says, and I want you to make the copper kior, the copper laver that you're going to use, that the Kohanim are going to sanctify themselves every single day. They're going to wash their hands, they're going to wash their feet with the water that comes out of that kior that's made from those mirrors. So we see something wonderful. There is nothing more pure and holy and perfect than unconditional giving love. There is nothing more important than that. And that's why these mirrors were the ones that needed to create the kior, in which the Kohanim purified and sanctified themselves for the Avodat Beit HaMikdash. So this is just a little start of of this idea of intimacy. Technically, I could stop here and focus onto another subject. I think there's more to say that we can maybe touch upon next month or the month after. But even just besides intimacy, we did touch upon a lot of subjects. That's why Isaac and Jacob felt that this was a good subject to begin with. And Bezrat Hashem, if anything, we should just understand that this is a mitzvah. You're fulfilling a mitzvah, a godly command to be intimate with your wife, and most importantly, it's expressing the greatest form of love, and ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which is zekal gadol b'Torah. If we understand that, and every husband and wife realizes this, their marriage will be extravagant. It will be perfect. It will be just everything you hoped for and more. Okay, we'll stop here. Bezrat Hashem, we'll connect next time.
Thank you so much.